Alright guys, so we are finally able to start drywalling this bathroom, at least the portions that are not going to have the curdy board for the shower surround. So what I do, I kind of just pick a starting point. So what we're going to do is just start here where the curdy board is going to start for the shower, and we'll start the drywall here and move all the way around to this side where the curdy board is going to start. So what I do, just a couple quick tips. I go through and mark all of my stud locations. So you'll see I just draw a line there on the subfloor to mark all my stud locations, so that when I'm going through and putting the drywall up, I know where those studs are, so it just makes it quick and easy for me to kind of reference that. Also, as I go, I'll take a measurement of where my electrical box is and water supply lines and any other obstructions that I have to cut out. I'll just make a note, and then I'll just mark those on my cuts, and then I'll just come in, hang everything, zip it out, and screw it off. So time to get going on that. Shouldn't take too long. There's not a whole lot to really cut around, and only doing these 3 smaller walls. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so I wanted to try something new, hanging this drywall, and I saw this actually online the other day, so I ordered some just to give them a go, see what they were all about, see how they worked. So what they are, they're pretty straightforward. So if you're patching drywall, and in this instance, I'm going to use them to hang the new drywall. So technically, or typically, when you're patching drywall, say if you have to cut out a square or something to patch, you gotta block in something behind in order to drill the new piece into. So these clips kind of, or they don't kind of, they do eliminate the need for that blocking behind. So this is my first time using them. We'll see how it goes. I'm just going to use these smaller 1-inch drywall screws, since I mean, in this case, it's nice. This is perfect application for them, since this seam is not going to fall on a stud. These just keep the two pieces at this butt joint on the same plane and level, so it just kind of keeps them together. So you'll screw in here, it'll hit those holes and hold, and then you'll screw in your new piece there. And then once you've got both pieces, these tabs, you bend them off and they break, so those go away, tape your seam, and you should be off and running. So let's see how it goes.
I still remember when I was really free, and all the things I lived. In the midst of the things that I left, I regret for this. It won't be the same, yeah. I never felt this way, cause I want to come back and find my way. And I have to run and run away. I finally choose.
Yeah, so there you go. They actually worked out pretty well. Good thing I used those smaller screws, because those the holes on these are so small. I don't know that they would take the larger 2-inch screws that I was using. They may give it a try, but yeah, they worked out pretty well. Seem to be holding everything pretty secure. There is a stud right here, so it's not spanning this whole distance, but it did tighten up that seam and pulled everything nice and tight. Those tabs broke off pretty easily. So I don't know that it's necessarily intended for holding a full-length seam like that. I think it's just for primarily for smaller repairs, if you have to repair something between two studs. So they'd definitely be handy if you're just doing small repairs, so you don't have to worry about cutting scraps and splitting it and everything once you're screwing into it, which happens all the time. So yeah, Instaback drywall repair clips. They have them in different thicknesses, so you can get them for whatever. If you're doing 5/8 drywall or whatever you're doing, they have different thicknesses there. So yeah, check them out.
Cause it feels like I'm wide awake and I'm standing in time. Now I'm disappearing, looking for light. this in the time for you. Yeah, I'm wide awake for real. I'm wide awake for real. Every day I still remember when I was really free and all the things I lived. In the midst of the things that I left, I regret for this. It won't be the same, yeah. I never felt this way, cause I want to come back and find my way. And I have to run and run away. I finally choose, yeah. Cause it feels like I'm wide awake and I'm standing in time. Now I'm disappearing, looking for light. This in the time for you. Yeah, I'm wide awake for real. I'm wide awake for real. Cause it feels like I'm wide awake and I'm standing in time. Now I'm disappearing, looking for light. This in the time for you. Yeah, I'm wide awake for real. I'm wide awake for real. I'm wide awake for real.
Alright, so there you go. I got the 3 walls drywalled to the point where we'll start the critty board for the shower surround. I know it's not the prettiest drywall job. I'm not a full-time drywaller. Holes are pretty spot on, so should work out. Seams are decent. Those clips worked out pretty well. Pulled that seam together. So I'll be using those again for sure. So now I just gotta do some taping, mudding, and we'll call it good for the drywall. So here we go. right, guys, so a little, or I guess my technique on how I do my corner seams. So I'm using, you'll see I've already got this one up here done. But on the corners, I'm using this. It's called Straight Flex. So for inside and outside 90-degree corners. So and what I did on my straight seams that I've already got done, I just use, typically I use this fiber fuse. It's like a netting almost, and it seems to fuse everything really well, and it's really easy to work with. You can use this in the corners, and I've used it in the corners in the past. It does fold nicely. It does create a nice seam, but I just opted to use this Straight Flex this time. So how I do my my corners, you'll see I've already got a liberal amount of the mud up here in the corners, and I've already got a piece of this Straight Flex cut to length. So this is going to be this wall, and what I'll do, just go ahead and pre-fold this piece all the way down. And what I'm using to kind of just burn it in are these 90-degree corner trowels. This is a mini trowel. I do have a full size that I use often too, but this small one is nice, especially when you're getting down in corners like this and you're trying to use it and you're hitting door hinges and that kind of stuff. This small one achieves the same end goal, just takes up smaller footprint. So I like to use the small one. It works really well when you're applying mud and that kind of stuff in small niches and tight areas. So like I said, fold the Straight Flex piece, get it up here where you want it. Kind of just press it in so it stays. And then just set it in with that corner trowel. So I first kind of work my way from the middle out when I'm getting it set. Once you've got it set for the most part, and you'll see there's a small gap there at the end, but that's okay, we can fix that. So make sure it's just in really good. You'll see it oozing out of these holes. So you just want to make sure it's set where it's need to be. And then once it's set, to get rid of these this excess there along the edges, I'll just take my 6-inch trowel or knife and just come back and taper those edges in. This is just the initial coat, so I like to just get everything set where it needs to be, let it dry overnight, and then we'll come back and put another coat on it. So that gives you a nice clean corner, and it'll help prevent cracking and that kind of stuff when your walls and everything are expanding and contracting. There at the ceiling and the wall joint, that's where you're always going to have your cracking. So it helps kind of eliminate that. It still might happen on that top surface of the drywall compound once you get that coated in there really well. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Like I said, I've already got all my straight seams done. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect this time around. We'll come back, hit it tomorrow, wet sand everything with a sponge, knock down any big edges, and then go over it again and get everything nice and smooth. Usually takes about 2 or 3 coats to get everything where you need it. So yeah, that's how I do it, my process. I know there's a dozen other processes out there and different trim pieces that you can use, but this is how I'm doing this one. Next time I might do it a different way depending on the circumstance, but that's what we're doing. So we're gonna finish this up and call it a day. Okay guys, so I've got the shower tiled. Still need to grout everything, but like I said, I'm going to wait to do that when I do the floor. So I'm going to move on and clean up some of this drywall, the areas that I've patched, and the seams and everything. Going to get those nice and smooth so I can prime the walls and get those ready for paint. So you'll see just on this spot here, I'm going to use it as an example. You'll see the lines and the edges. So a tip that I didn't come across until recently is to wet sand. So just take a large sponge like this and just get it damp. It doesn't have to be soaking wet, just really damp, wring it out really well. And I'm using the green all-purpose compound that just comes pre-mixed. You can get it in the box, but I just get it pre-mixed. So that's what I've used on all these joints and screw holes and everything. So what I'm going to do, and I'll try to show you the best I can here, just take this damp sponge, and I've already done some of these other nail holes over, or screw holes over here, but you'll just rub in a circular motion around that edge to kind of taper that edge, and you can just see that edge disappear. So you'll see this just kind of gently rub it and taper it in. And that hard line will just work away. And you don't even have to rub very hard. So it's really nice. Get out some of these other imperfections. Smooth it out really well. And you may still have to go back and touch up a few spots. Like this is pretty bad. It's bad job on my part, so I may have to just go back and hit that. But a lot of these imperfections and everything will just rub right out. And this part will be covered by my door trim, so I'm not super worried about that, but I still want to get it nice and smooth so that that trim sits nice and flat. Yeah, so I'll come back and hit that line right there. And this part that won't be covered by the light switch cover. Fade that in, and then just give everything a nice once over. So yeah, really easy, a lot cleaner than having to use a sander and make a bunch of dust. So dust free, it's you know, doesn't even take as much elbow grease as it would if you're doing all that hand sanding. Don't have to worry about, you know, setting up dust extraction and everything for your sanders. But that's what I'm going to do on all these screw holes and seams, get them the best I can. There's a few spots that I know I'm going to have to go back and hit again. So I'll get everything as good as I can, go back and hit those spots, and then hopefully by the end of the day let everything sit, and I'll go ahead and get primer on the walls so that I can get some paint and everything on them tomorrow. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be working on. Okay, so I'm doing some wall prep. I've got the walls wet sanded, all the joints and screw holes and everything, so I've got those looking pretty good and almost ready for paint. But what I'm doing now, I'm adding in some caulk in all the corner seams. And I went ahead and caulked along my trim for my shower, just so that when I go to paint and prime, I have a nice clean line. You can most definitely caulk after you paint, which is what I'll do sometimes, usually on these joints. But up in the corners between the walls and the ceiling, I'm going in and caulking. You can kind of see there where I've already caulked that joint. But I am just using this, it is DAP Extreme Stretch, I believe it's called. It's a paintable, just white caulk. It's paintable in 2 hours. So this is an elastomeric sealant, so it stretches. It says, I think it stretches like 600% or something. It's only used it a couple times, but I'm just going through adding it in these corners, and it kind of helps. There's these little drywall mud ripples, kind of where you go in, and I tried to get those as best I could, but there's still these little imperfections in the corner. So just going through with some caulk gives it a nice clean line all the way around, and it'll also prevent and maybe mask some of that cracking if that were to ever happen. I did use the trim, the drywall trim, when I mudded everything, so it shouldn't crack, but just as an extra measure, I'll go through and caulk all those, all the corner seams and the vertical seams going down as well. Like I said, just to hide some of these imperfections in here, and it'll also kind of serve as an extra precaution against it cracking. So I'm going to do that here on the walls. Let that cure for a couple hours. And while that is curing, I'm going to grout the shower and the floor. And then once everything's nice and cured, I'll come back and hit the ceiling and the walls with a coat of primer so that when we come in on Monday, everything's ready for paint and trim and all that good stuff. So we'll get it wrapped up. But that should be the last step here in the wall prep. Everything else is looking pretty good. I've got the seams, like I said, wet sanded. There was a spot on the ceiling around the fan where I fixed all of that. So I'm going to prime and paint, and then everything should look pretty good. Okay guys, so here is kind of the example of what I was just explaining in the caulking the corners. So you can see I've caulked, if you can see that, caulked that corner. Everything is nice and clean. And then this is one that I've not done. So you can see those tiny little imperfections there in the corner just from the drywall compound. And those, I mean, that could be sanded if you sanded long enough. But I mean, this is a much easier way, and it gives a nice clean finish, hides those imperfections. And like I said, it serves as another measure to prevent that cracking, because that caulk is going to move, whereas your joint compound is not. So kind of killed two birds with one stone. And then we're gonna let that cure, and then we will prime and paint so everything is good to go. So it's time to prep and paint our walls. So I'm going to be applying this Kills 3 premium primer to the new drywall and to the ceiling. So you can see all the spots where I've coated there with the drywall compound. So I'm going to go over this, all the new drywall. Thing I like about this Kills, it's fast drying, so I can paint it. It says in an hour. I probably won't get to it in an hour, but I'll get to it this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and put a good coat of this on all the walls and the ceiling. Let that cure, and then we'll hit it with some paint this afternoon. So I'm just going to be doing a white paint. So we'll see how this this covers and how many coats of that top coat we're going to need. But I mean, it is pretty thick, and I've used it in the past, and it does have some pretty good coverage. So I'm hoping I'll just need the one coat, but we'll probably have to do two just to be safe, since I am doing a white top coat. So this is the mildew resistant finish. So that's another perk of using it in the bathroom in these high moisture areas. So I'm going to be using that. And then the paint that I'm using, so the paint that I'm using is this. This will be used on the ceiling. So this is Sherwin-Williams Eminence. This has some mildew resistant qualities as well, so going to be using that on the ceiling. It's just a flat white. And then the wall paint that I'm going to be using is this Dutch Boy Forever. So I've used this in the past too, and it had some pretty good coverage. I usually try to opt for the Sherwin-Williams. That's what I'll be using. I'll be using the Sherwin-Williams Pro Classic on the trim. So that's what I'll be using on just the base trim in here. It's got a nice semi-gloss finish, and it cleans up really well, and it's really durable. It has a pretty hard finish, so it's good for those trim pieces and that kind of stuff. And then the Dutch Boy, that's just what I had available at Menards this weekend. So I wasn't able to get the Sherwin-Williams, but I've used this in the past and it does have pretty good coverage, and since it's only going to be these 3 small walls, and we're going to do a good primer before. A lot of these paints now, they say paint and primer in one. In my opinion, that's just kind of a marketing scheme. I would always suggest using a good primer as your first coat. I would never rely on the paint itself as the primer, especially when you're doing fresh new drywall. If you've got painted walls already and the walls are in good shape, then you may be able to just go ahead and use the paint itself. But I always like to get everything nice and clean and hit it with some good primer and then a good paint. Like I said, I usually prefer the Sherwin-Williams, but the Dutch Boy Forever is pretty decent. So we'll go with that. It's nothing fancy in here. It's just gonna be some white walls, keeping everything nice and bright since it is a smaller space. So everything should flow really nicely with the white tile and the gray shower. So we're gonna get to priming and then we'll hit it with some paint this afternoon. Alright guys, so I've got the walls all painted, the ceiling freshly painted, just touched up a few spots. So I got 2 coats on the walls and 2 coats on the ceiling, along with the Kills primer that I showed. So the walls are good to go. Time to start doing some of our finishes. This spot on the wall here I left just primed because that's where my mirror will go. And I will have some adhesive behind that mirror, so I wanted to just leave it primed so that adhesive will stick to it. So everything else is pretty much good to go. Time to start putting some trim and some of the finishes in here, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and caulk the tub and shower. So I've got my fixtures in, shower all cleaned up and ready for some caulk. And then once we've got that done, it'll be ready to get the vanity and trim and toilet and everything back in here and button everything up. So walls look pretty good, nice and bright in here. So stay tuned. I'm getting there to the home stretch. So I'm gonna go ahead and caulk this tub and work towards that finish line.